In this short tutorial, let's look at some of the techniques you can use for revising work for tests and exams. Tests and exams, unfortunately, are part of our learning life, and they are at school as much as they are at university, and in fact they're often part of courses associated with businesses and all kinds of learning. Many of us don't much like doing tests and exams, but being able to do well at them is really important if we want to show what it is that we can remember, what we understand and what we know. And this kind of information doesn't just kind of magically land in our heads. We have to train our brains, train our bodies to revise well so that we can get this information into our memories. And we need to train ourselves to be able to do exam questions as well, so we can learn how to bring that information out of our heads onto the paper or onto a computer of some kind. So these are just a few tips. They're not the only ones, and I'm sure you would find plenty of material on the web if you weren't looking. But the most important thing to realise here is that good revision involves more than just what we call passive reading. That your brain needs to be engaged actively with the material that you're trying to learn. Your brain is trying to remember the material that it is that you've learnt. And to remember it, most brains need to make sense of it in some way. They need to be able to understand the things that you're expected to know. If the brain doesn't understand it, then it finds it very difficult to remember it because it doesn't make any sense to it. The other thing that the brain needs is repetition. So it's not enough just to read something once and hope that somehow it magically goes into our brain cells, because it just doesn't. And good psychological studies have shown that repetition is essential for the brain to work. Make sure I get my spelling correct. Repetition with an E. Alright, so the brain needs repetition. It needs to be able to understand the material that it's trying to remember. The brain needs to be active in its learning. It's not enough just to passively read material and hope that the information magically will go in through your eyes and into the brain. This rarely happens unless you happen to have a photographic memory, and very, very few people have such a kind of memory. Most people need to be active in their learning. They need to be doing something, either writing or summarising or making flashcards or talking or quizzing or something to engage the brain with the material that it is they're trying to remember and to understand. If you take these kind of principles seriously and you want to learn seriously, then you need to actively set this up so that it works for you. And it takes time to do this. So if you have an enormous amount of material that you want to remember and to learn, it's no good sitting down a few hours or the night before a test and hoping that it'll all magically go in. It just doesn't happen. So you need to set yourself a kind of a timetable that will let you map out what it is that you need to learn and when you're going to learn it, so that you don't get stressed and you know that you can cover all the essential material before you get to a test or exam. And this will help enormously in giving you a sense of control and achievement as you work through revision. So it's helpful to have a timetable that you can stick on the wall of your room, outlining when you're going to do the different topics that you're going to study. And it's good to be very specific with this. Actually name days and dates in the timetable. It might only be, if it's just for a test, it might be just a week ahead of the test. You might write down the date of each day and what you plan to actually work through. So be very specific, don't be vague, and the more specific you are, the more likely you are to do it. Set up your timetable so that when you've completed a particular section you can tick it, and even consider rewarding yourself with something. It might be a little bit of television, it might be a little computer game or an iPod game for 10 or 15 minutes, it might be some food that you like, a biscuit or a drink, but set yourself a time limit, 10 or 15 minutes to give yourself a break so that your brain is refreshed, and then come back and deal with another topic and tick it off, reward yourself in some way again, come back and tackle another topic, and so on. And you'll find that this structure gives you a real sense of achievement as you work through your revision process. The other thing that you should have is some focal point for your revision. And here it's worthwhile considering just buying yourself a cheap exercise book or even a separate folder, but something easy and convenient so that you can actually write some revision notes and summaries in. And it's worth having one of these perhaps for each subject that you do. So you might have a science revision book. It's just kept separate from your notes, your folder, or even your computer. It could be that you could set up such a revision section in OneNote on your Ultrabook, but keep it separate from your main learning so that it's seen as revision. So what are some of the things that you could do to actively engage with the material that you're trying to learn? So let's look at the kinds of things. So ultimately you want to get an understanding and knowledge and skills into your brain. So of course there are the obvious things. You could read, okay, and you will have to read. You'll have to read your notes. That's why taking a great set of notes is such a great starting point for good reading. If you have a dense page of words, nobody wants to sit there and try and wade through them. So this is why I encourage my students to consider using colour for the special words that they have to learn so that they leap off the page. Or they could use bolding if they are using OneNote, or italics, or underlining. All work to make specialist words leap off the page out of all the background words. So reading is important. You could have, of course, include your textbook in that, but just sitting reading a textbook is not particularly good revision. So the idea of your notes is that they are a precise summary of what it is you need to know out of your textbook. But sometimes, if there's a section in your notes you're not too sure of, reading that section in your textbook can give you another perspective and help. But don't just read the textbook and hope that it's all going to work. Now, as you read, you should write. Okay, so you'll be reading a section of notes, and it's best to read it in small chunks. So don't try and read huge slabs at a time and then try and remember it, because this will just be overwhelming. So we call this chunking down to something manageable that your brain can cope with. So you may then actively summarize a particular idea or a definition that you have to learn. So write it out again, and especially try writing it in your own words. Now, this is not a process of copying. Don't just copy out what you already have, because your brain just disengages from this and it's not helpful. So just focus on one thing at a time and then attempt to write it out in your own words, perhaps in some abbreviated form. So this can be helpful. So you might do this in your revision book. Or, as many students find, putting this onto a set of flashcards. Again, whether you do this on paper or cardboard that you can get from a stationery shop, or these days there's some fantastic free flashcard apps from the iTunes store, and I'm sure on the Android store for your iPod or iPhone or your other phones. And you can type in a particular idea or word to it. You can type in the meaning of the word, and then these apps allow you to test yourself. Can you remember the definition? And they have ways of approving, or telling you when you're correct or when you're not correct, and giving you a chance to do it again and again and again. And this is a very effective way of taking small amounts of information at a time and trying to get it into your brain. So these are flashcards. And if you look up ones on the internet or on your iTunes store, you'll find, I'm sure, plenty of recommendations for good and free ones. So what else could you do? Well, you could engage in some kind of quiz with a partner. So this tends to not be a particularly good technique until you've done a lot of the background learning. So it's no good launching straight into this, because the only thing you'll realise is how much you don't know. But after you've done this kind of process, then it's helpful to test yourself. So get a partner and check out what each other knows. And when you don't know something, don't just go, oh, I don't know that, and forget it. Make a note of what you don't know, and then you can return back to the appropriate flashcard, or you might return back to the appropriate reading and check it out until you are clear on it, and then get quizzed on it again and see how you go with that. Some people find it really useful to have a go at drawing the ideas. Some people are visual learners, so drawing diagrams, drawing what's written in your notes can sometimes be a very helpful way of getting the brain to engage with it. So try drawing as a way of learning and revising as well. There are probably many other techniques that you could use as well, but the beauty of all of this is that it's active. It's not just passive, and by actively doing it, it helps the brain to engage with it. Perhaps the final point of this process is that you have a go at trying to pull this material out of your brain, from your memory, and putting it down on paper without any prompts. So you might test yourself, test your memory, by doing practice questions, past tests or past exam papers, or it might be just a case of naming the topic and then writing down everything you can remember about it. So test yourself, and if you come up against a brick wall and you can't remember something, make sure that you note that. Give yourself a pat on the back for the things you can remember. For the things you can't remember, you go back into the process again. So back to the notes, back to the summary, re-summarize it again until it clicks, back to the flashcards, back to the quizzes, all right, back to the drawings, whatever you've done, and then come back to testing yourself again. And you may have to do this several times on some of the tougher ideas. This is why it's important to start start well before the night before a test or exam, because if you come and get up against problems on the night before, you haven't got a chance to really engage with this. And the final thing I would say through all of this is that the more times you do this, the easier it becomes. You train yourself to get into a good pattern. You will be rewarded immensely, because your marks will go up. The effort you put into it will directly be translated into much better marks. And when you see that you can improve, when you see that it's not about your intelligence but about your effort, you will hopefully realise that you are capable of wonderful things. And the more you believe that, the more it will become true. If you need help with any of this, if you're not sure of how to do anything, of course, see your teacher. All right? See your teacher. They will help you. They will give you tips. They're practiced in this kind of thing. See them, talk to them, get help. Don't be afraid. Teachers are more than willing to help you to improve. That's their job. Email them at appropriate times. Don't expect answers or responses at times outside of school. But if you email them during school, then it gives the teacher a chance to choose the time that they can get back to you. Talk to them in the corridors, come and see them at lunchtime, and you'll find that they are more than willing to give you the sort of help that you need. So I hope this tutorial has been useful and it's given you a few tips. Try it out, show your teacher your plans, talk to them about it, and you will be rewarded for this effort.